The courtroom fell silent, the air thick with tension, as General Rayla Kairos stepped into the center of the vast, gleaming hall. The Galactic Empire's highest tribunal awaited her, the eyes of 1,000 officials trained on her every move. For decades, she had been a symbol of strength, a fearless leader who fought to the last breath against the Xipher, a brutal alien race. Now, she stood accused of war crimes. The charges were as vast as they were damning: genocide, mass murder, the wholesale slaughter of civilian populations. The very same victories that once earned her accolades were now twisted into accusations of unspeakable horrors. Rayla's heart pounded in her chest, but her face remained cold, her eyes sharp as she took her place in the defendant's seat. The head judge, a towering figure with a voice like crackling thunder, cleared his throat and spoke in a voice that seemed to echo through the chamber. General Rayla Kairos, you stand accused of war crimes committed during the conflict with the Xipher. How do you plead? The words were like ice, biting into the edges of her resolve. War crimes. They didn't even have the decency to call them what they were: survival tactics. The Xipher were merciless invaders who had left no room for negotiation, no space for mercy. Rayla had only done what was necessary to protect the people of the Empire. I plead not guilty. Rayla's voice was calm, controlled, but her words cut through the air with precision. A murmur ran through the room, the weight of her defiance settling on the gathered elites. They were all watching her, some eager to see her broken, others too afraid to speak the truth. Rayla could feel their judgment in every glance, every whisper that lingered on the edges of her hearing. But she had never been one to bow to fear. The prosecution rose, a lean, sharp-eyed man named Vizardrex, a cold-blooded officer who had risen through the ranks by erasing those who were inconvenient. His expression was the picture of calm, but the malice in his eyes was unmistakable. General Kairos, Drex began, we have compiled overwhelming evidence of your crimes. The destruction of Xipher colonies, the decimation of their civilian populations, and the use of biological weapons forbidden under the Empire's own law. Rayla's jaw tightened, but she did not respond. Drex continued, each word another nail in her coffin. You orchestrated a campaign that resulted in the deaths of billions, without regard for the innocent lives caught in the crossfire. You turned your back on the very principles of the Empire you once swore to protect. Rayla clenched her fists. Innocent lives. The phrase sent a surge of anger through her. She had fought to protect the Empire, to protect the people who depended on them. The Xipher had left them no choice. But the Empire had long since decided that she was expendable. Drex presented holographic images of destroyed cities, burned to the ground by the very weapons she had commanded. He showed footage of families fleeing in terror, their cries echoing in the background as the Xipher forces advanced. Rayla's chest tightened. The images were haunting, but they weren't the full truth. They were the Empire's narrative, spun to paint her as a monster. Asterisk, they want her dead. They want to bury the truth. Asterisk. Drex turned to the tribunal, eyes gleaming with the sickening pleasure of someone who knew they were winning. General Kairos, he said, how do you justify these atrocities? How do you explain the mass slaughter of civilians under your command? Rayla's mind raced, but her face remained a mask of calm. She could feel the eyes of the room on her, the weight of their judgment, but she knew one thing. She would not be their scapegoat. The truth would come out, no matter the cost. The chamber seemed to hold its breath as Rayla stood, her voice steady but cutting through the tension like a blade. I am not the war criminal here, she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had witnessed the horrors the Empire would rather hide. I was a soldier. I did what was necessary to protect the Empire, to save billions from an enemy that had no mercy. I did what I had to do to end a war that was already lost to us. Drex's lips curled into a sneer. Is that your defense? That the end justifies the means? Rayla stood tall, her gaze never leaving the tribunal. No. What I'm about to show you will make you rethink your accusations. The truth isn't what you think it is. The room grew colder. Rayla had only just begun, and she knew the fight for her life had only just begun. But she would not be silenced. Not this time. "Your Honor," she said, "I request permission to reveal the truth. Not just about me, but about the empire you serve." The judge paused, clearly unsure of what she was about to unleash. But he nodded. "Proceed, General." Rayla took a deep breath. It was time for the Empire to see what true war crimes really were. Rayla's words hung in the air, like a challenge thrown into a storm. The courtroom was momentarily stunned into silence, and for the first time since her trial began, she saw doubt flicker across the faces of the tribunal. They had expected her to cower, to beg for mercy. But instead, she had offered them something far more dangerous, the truth. "Permission granted," the head judge's voice rumbled, though it was clear he did not fully understand the weight of what Rayla was about to reveal. She could feel the collective breath of the room held tight, waiting for her next move. She didn't hesitate. Rayla stepped forward, her eyes locking with the tribunal's leaders, her every word deliberate. "The charges you've brought against me are nothing more than a distraction. You think I'm guilty of war crimes? I will show you the true horrors, horrors you've buried so deep, the galaxy doesn't even know they exist." A faint murmur rippled through the room, and Rayla activated a small device embedded in the table before her. A holographic image flickered to life, casting a ghostly glow across the darkened courtroom. The image was of a planet, no, a graveyard. The once thriving world of Lorien Prime, a key Zypher colony, was now a twisted shell of its former self. Smoldering ruins stretched as far as the eye could see, the oceans poisoned, the air thick with a toxic haze. Rayla's voice was cold, almost detached as she began her tale. "This is Lorien Prime. This is what happens when the Empire's orders are followed to the letter." The room shifted uneasily as the images continued to unfold. The hologram zoomed in, revealing the aftermath of the surgical strike the Empire had claimed responsibility for, a strike that had been anything but precise. Entire civilian districts had been wiped out, with no regard for the Zypher families who lived there. The warhead, designed to obliterate an enemy military base, had instead obliterated everything in its path. Homes, schools, hospitals, and markets, all reduced to rubble. "You see," Rayla continued, her voice steady despite the gravity of her words, "the Empire's precision strikes were nothing more than scorched earth tactics. The truth is that we were ordered to raze worlds to the ground, not to defeat the Zypher, but to erase entire populations. No one was safe." A sharp gasp came from the audience, but Rayla didn't flinch. She had seen this devastation firsthand. She had ordered some of it herself. "What you've been told is a lie," she said, her voice cutting through the murmurs of disbelief. "I wasn't the one who committed these atrocities. I was the one sent to clean up after them. I was the one sent to pacify the remaining survivors, to put the fires out, both literal and figurative. But when the real war criminals issue orders from the shadows, the soldiers are left with no choice." Rayla pressed another button, and the scene changed. The hologram shifted to reveal the footage of a clandestine meeting. Empire officials, high-ranking military leaders, and corporate heads, all sitting around a round table, discussing strategy. The conversation was in hushed tones, but it was clear from their demeanor that they were no strangers to cruelty. "This," Rayla said, "is where the orders came from. The extermination protocols. We were told that some worlds needed to be eradicated, not just because they were a threat, but because they were of no strategic value. Entire populations were deemed unnecessary, and no one could question it." She glanced at the tribunal, watching their reactions carefully. There were a few who refused to look her in the eye, others who appeared sickened, and a few who had the look of politicians caught in a lie too large to deny. But Rayla knew it didn't matter. The truth was out now. "The Empire is not what you think it is," she pressed on. "It's not a force of justice, of honor, or of peace. It's a machine built on lies, fed by the blood of those it considers expendable." She took a breath, her gaze steady as she looked out over the room. "I didn't just fight to defend the Empire. I fought because I believed in it. I believed that what we were doing would make the galaxy safer. But now I see the truth. Asterisk, the Empire itself is the greatest threat the galaxy has ever known. Asterisk." The room was silent. The holographic images had been replaced with a still frame of Rayla herself, a younger version, her face etched with the same determination she had carried through the war. Rayla let the silence linger, allowing the weight of her words to settle. But then, the tension snapped. Drex, the prosecutor, stood abruptly, his face flushed with fury. "This is nonsense," he shouted, his voice trembling with anger. "You're trying to twist the facts. These are just stories, fabrications, lies." Rayla's lips curled into a thin smile, the first hint of emotion she'd shown all session. "No, Drex. These are the facts. These are the files I've been holding onto for years. The ones you tried to bury, the ones the Empire thought they could hide forever. But now they're out in the open." Her eyes locked onto Drex's, and the prosecutor froze. "You called me a war criminal," she said, her voice low, "but I'm not the one you should be worried about." As the room fell into a tense, heavy silence, Rayla knew she had only just begun. What they had called war crimes were nothing compared to the horrors the Empire had committed in its name. And now, it was time for the galaxy to learn the truth. Rayla had barely finished speaking when the doors to the courtroom slammed open, and a cold wave of dread washed over her. She knew this was coming. The Empire would never allow the truth to stand, especially not after she had revealed the first cracks in their facade. Her words had only been the beginning, and now the Empire was about to make their move. A squad of Imperial guards entered the chamber, their polished armor gleaming under the harsh lights. At their center was Vizar Drex, the prosecutor, whose face was twisted into a sneer of unrestrained fury. Rayla's stomach churned as she watched him stride toward the tribunal's podium. "You want to play games, General?" Drex's voice was low, filled with venom. "Then let's see how you handle the real consequences of your actions." Before Rayla could react, two guards grabbed her arms and yanked her from her seat. She struggled, but knew better than to resist fully. The Empire didn't just punish its enemies, it obliterated them. "Take her to the holding cells," Drex barked. As the guards dragged her through the hall, Rayla fought to steady her breath. She had anticipated this, but the cold steel of their grip on her arms still sent a sharp stab of unease through her. They were moving fast, with a purpose. This wasn't just about silencing her in the courtroom. It was a warning to her, and to anyone else who might dare speak against the Empire. They shoved her into a darkened cell with no windows, just the cold hum of the energy shields that prevented escape. The guards left without a word, the door locking with a heavy click behind them. Rayla stood in the center of the room, the silence oppressive, her mind racing. She knew this was far from over. The trial had been a setup from the beginning, a way to discredit her, to neutralize her influence. But now that the Empire had seen she wouldn't back down, they were resorting to more direct measures. Her hands clenched into fists. They wanted to bury the truth. They wanted her broken. But they were making a mistake. Rayla Kairos didn't break. Hours passed, and the isolation began to gnaw at her. But she didn't give in. She'd faced worse, far worse, on the front lines of the war. The Zephyr had been merciless, yes, but their cruelty was nothing compared to the Empire's. The Empire had built its power on deception, on the manipulation of its own people. And Rayla would not let them erase her fight for the truth. Suddenly, the silence was shattered by the sound of footsteps. One of the guards returned, his face unreadable behind his helmet. "General," he said curtly, "you have a visitor." Rayla's pulse quickened, and she followed him through the winding corridors, the weight of the situation settling heavily on her chest. A visitor? The last time she'd seen anyone from the outside was when the tribunal had called her in for questioning. She hadn't expected anyone to come to her aid, at least not yet. When they reached a secured room, the guard stepped aside, and Rayla's heart skipped a beat. Standing there was Captain Yarrick, the man she had once worked alongside in the Empire's intelligence division. Yarrick was an enigma, aloof, calculating, and fiercely loyal to those he believed in. Rayla hadn't seen him in years, not since his mysterious disappearance after the war. Yet here he was, standing before her, as if no time had passed. "You look like hell," Yarrick said, his eyes flickering with a hint of amusement. That's what happens when the Empire decides you're a liability, Rayla replied dryly. He nodded, stepping closer. Drex is going to make sure you're not leaving here alive, Rayla. You know that, right? She didn't flinch. I'm not worried about Drex. I'm worried about what's coming next. The Empire can't silence the truth. Not this time. Jarek's eyes darkened. You might be right, but they'll try. And you can't do it alone. Rayla hesitated. What are you offering, Yarek? His gaze met hers, unyielding and intense. I'm offering you a chance to fight back. I've got allies within the Empire who are just as fed up with the lies as you are. They want the truth to come out, too. We can expose it all, but we need you. Rayla's mind raced. Allies inside the Empire? It sounded too good to be true, but she knew better than to dismiss it. The Empire's stranglehold on the galaxy was built on secrecy, and even the smallest crack in its foundation could bring it crumbling down. She had to take the chance. I'm in, she said, her voice steady. Yarek smiled, but it was a grim, determined smile. Good. Because if we don't act fast, it's not just you they'll be coming for. It's everyone who's ever stood against them. The door clicked shut behind her as she walked out, and for the first time in hours, Rayla felt a spark of hope. The battle wasn't over yet. It was just beginning. Rayla's boots thudded heavily against the metal floor as she stepped into the dimly lit war room. The air was thick with the smell of old tech, grease, and the lingering tension of a battle yet to be fought. Across the table sat Yarek, his fingers drumming on the surface, his face unreadable. Behind him, the large screen displayed various images, classified files, maps, schematics of military facilities. The weight of the decision they had made, the decision to go after the heart of the Empire, hung in the air. Rayla could feel it, like a physical presence pressing down on her chest. The Empire was too vast, too powerful. But it was also fragile. Its leaders ruled with fear, and fear was always vulnerable to collapse. We can't do this alone, Yarek said, breaking the silence. His voice was tight, though he was trying to maintain control. Rayla nodded slowly. No, we can't. But we have to start somewhere. She turned toward the screen, her gaze fixed on the glowing map of the Empire's capital. The facility they were targeting was the crown jewel of the Empire's military-industrial complex, a fortress where some of the Empire's darkest secrets were kept. Rayla had served there once, in the heart of it all, and now it was her target. The Empire's military machine is massive, she said, her voice low. They've built it to withstand anything, but they're not invincible. Jarek's eyes flickered with uncertainty. And you think we can take them down with a handful of disillusioned soldiers and a bunch of outdated equipment? Rayla's gaze hardened. I know we can. Because the one thing they don't understand is people like us. They're used to obedience, to control. They've forgotten what it's like to face something they can't predict. That's where we come in. Her words hung in the air as Yarek mulled them over. Finally, he leaned back in his chair, letting out a long breath. We've got a small group of rebels ready to go, he said. But they're not soldiers. They're civilians, engineers, tech specialists, ex-Empire officers, people who've had enough. They don't know how to fight, not like you and I. Rayla let out a sharp exhale. We train them. We make them soldiers, even if it's only for this mission. We don't need an army, we just need enough firepower to hit them where it hurts. Jarek's skepticism remained, but it was clear that he was beginning to see her point. So what's the plan? How do we get in there? Rayla stepped forward, her fingers tracing the holographic map as she outlined the plan. The facility is well protected, but there are gaps. Security is tight, but it's also predictable. The Empire always underestimates the power of chaos. We'll use their arrogance against them. She outlined the mission in detail, the risks clear, but the rewards greater. A small strike force would infiltrate the facility, plant explosives in key locations, and disrupt the Empire's command center. They would then broadcast the footage of the Empire's darkest secrets to the galaxy, exposing the truth about the atrocities they'd hidden for so long. And how do we get the truth out? Yarek asked. We'll need access to their communication systems, but they've locked everything down. Rayla's eyes gleamed. That's where our tech specialists come in. We'll breach their systems, then upload the classified files. Let the entire galaxy see what the Empire really is." Yarrick nodded, his expression shifting from doubt to grim determination. "You're talking about an all-out war. The Empire won't just retaliate. They'll send everything they have." "I know," Rayla said, her tone steady. "But we can't wait any longer. The longer we let them build their empire on lies, the more people will suffer. This isn't just about us anymore. It's about the future of the galaxy." Yarrick stood up, his face hardening as he took in her words. "Then we'll do it. No turning back now." Rayla met his gaze. She had been a soldier for most of her life, but this mission was different. It wasn't about winning a war, it was about ending a regime built on lies. For too long, the Empire had used her and countless others as pawns in a game they controlled. She had fought to survive, to protect the people she loved, but now she would fight for something bigger. She would fight to take down the corrupt system that had used her as a weapon. "Let's get to work," she said, the fire in her eyes unmistakable. The hours that followed were a blur of training, planning, and preparations. Jarrick's network of rebels worked around the clock to ready their gear, reprogramming old ships, stripping down weapons, and preparing a small fleet of forces that would go with Rayla into the heart of the Empire. They had no time to waste and no room for failure. As dawn broke over the horizon, Rayla stood at the front of the makeshift base, watching the sun rise over the distant mountains. It felt surreal, standing on the brink of something so monumental. The stars above had always seemed so far away, so untouchable. Now they seemed within reach. She had once believed that the Empire would always reign, that their power was too great to overcome. But now she understood that the greatest strength the Empire had was fear, and fear could be shattered. The soldiers, civilians, and rebels who had gathered behind her were ready. They had trained hard, learned quickly, and now they were ready to make their stand. Rayla turned toward them, her voice steady and commanding. "Today, we fight for the truth. We fight for the future. And we fight for those who can't fight for themselves." The small group of soldiers, their faces hardened by desperation and resolve, nodded in unison. They knew the stakes. They knew the risks. "We move out in 5, Rayla said. "Keep your heads down, stay in formation, and stay focused. We don't get second chances." As she spoke, she felt the weight of what they were about to do settle over her. This wasn't just a battle. This was the first step toward bringing down a corrupt empire. The final pieces of the plan were in place, and there was no turning back now. The war for the galaxy was about to begin. Rayla's pulse quickened as the doors to the command center slid open, revealing the heart of the Empire's most tightly guarded secrets. The hum of machinery, the low thrum of energy shields, and the cold, sterile air made her feel like she had stepped into the belly of the beast itself. But this wasn't just any mission. It was the moment they had been working toward. The time to expose the Empire's crimes, to break their stranglehold on the galaxy, was now. Yarrick was at her side, his face grim as he surveyed the high-tech surveillance equipment, the data terminals, and the walls lined with security monitors. This was the place where they would make their final stand, if they didn't get caught first. "We need to move fast," Yarrick muttered. "We have less than an hour before the lockdown is complete." Rayla nodded, her mind racing. The explosive devices they'd planted in key structural areas were set to trigger within the hour, but if they didn't access the central data core soon, the Empire would wipe all the evidence they had worked so hard to uncover. They had to act now. "Where's the access point?" Rayla asked, her voice steady but urgent. Jarrick's eyes flicked to the far wall. "That terminal. It's connected directly to their mainframe. If we can break through their encryption, we'll get access to everything, the truth about Project Dawn, the biological weapon experiments, the secret fleets they've been building in the outer systems." Rayla didn't waste a second. She moved swiftly toward the terminal, pulling up her interface panel. Her fingers flew over the screen, bypassing firewalls and security protocols with the ease of someone who had once been on the inside. The seconds stretched into eternity as she worked, each moment more critical than the last. Sweat beaded on her forehead, but her focus never wavered. She had been in tight spots before, but this was different. The stakes had never been higher. Finally, the terminal blinked green. A soft chime echoed through the room, signaling her success. "We're in," she said, exhaling in relief. Yarrick moved closer, his gaze fixed on the screen as the data began to flood in. Blueprints of ships, chemical formulas, personnel files. But there was one file Rayla had been searching for, one that would change everything. She entered the command sequence that would pull up the most sensitive data, Project Dawn. The file loaded with an unsettling swiftness, and as Rayla read through it, her blood ran cold. Project Dawn wasn't just a weapon. It was an entire program designed to create genetically modified soldiers, super warriors capable of surviving extreme environments, with enhanced strength, speed, and intelligence. But it wasn't just the enhancements that disturbed her. It was the fact that the Empire had been using human DNA to create these abominations. Rayla's stomach twisted as she read the final lines. Asterisk Subject Alpha. Prototype success. Combat trial pending. Asterisk. Rayla. Jarrick's voice snapped her back to reality. She could hear the concern in his tone, but she couldn't tear her eyes away from the file. Project Dawn, they've been using us, she murmured, her mind reeling. They've been creating soldiers using our DNA. Not just Zypher genetics, but human genetics. And they've succeeded. They have a weapon, a super soldier, who is more dangerous than anything we've faced. Yarrick stepped forward, his face hardening as he absorbed the information. That explains the whispers. I heard rumors about experiments in the outer sectors. They've been perfecting this for years. Rayla slammed her fist into the terminal, a flash of anger sweeping through her. This isn't just about the war. It's about creating an army of monsters. And if we don't stop them, they'll use this weapon to wipe out everything in their path. Jarrick's gaze sharpened. Where is he? Subject Alpha is being held at the main facility, Rayla said, her voice grim. We need to get out of here and stop him before they send him out into the field. If he's anything like the files suggest, he could single-handedly crush the rebellion and any hope we have left. The room suddenly felt smaller, the walls closing in as the weight of their mission became clearer. This wasn't just about exposing the Empire's secrets. It was about taking down the one thing that could turn the tide in their favor. Rayla turned to Yarrick, her resolve hardening. We can't leave here without stopping him. If we don't destroy Subject Alpha, everything we've worked for will be for nothing. Yarrick nodded, his expression unreadable. Then we destroy him. With that, Rayla took a final look at the terminal, pulling up one last file. This one detailing Alpha's location. He was closer than she had feared. And if they were going to stop him, they would have to move fast. The countdown to the end of the Empire had begun. But with Subject Alpha on their heels, the real battle was only just beginning. The sound of footsteps echoed through the corridors as Rayla and Yarrick moved swiftly, their breaths shallow but steady. The mission had escalated faster than either of them had anticipated. Subject Alpha was no longer just a threat. He was the Empire's ultimate weapon, and he was hunting them. Keep moving, Yarrick whispered, his voice tight. We're almost there. Rayla didn't respond, her mind focused entirely on the mission. The walls felt like they were closing in, each step bringing them closer to the heart of the Empire's command center, and to Alpha. If they didn't take him down now, the rebellion would be finished before it even began. They reached the final door, a heavy security barrier blocking their path. The camera system blinked, indicating an imminent lockdown. Rayla's heart skipped. They had moments, not minutes. Disrupt the security grid, Rayla ordered, her voice low but commanding. Yarrick stepped forward, his fingers flying over his portable console, tapping in commands with a precision that only came from years of experience. He cursed under his breath as the system fought back, but he didn't falter. 5 seconds, he muttered. Rayla's hand hovered over the detonator for the charges planted in the facility's core. She knew that taking down Alpha was their priority, but if they had to destroy the facility to stop the Empire's endless war machine, she would do it without hesitation. The lock clicked. The door slid open. Rayla's eyes scanned the room, taking in the vast control center. Screens flickered, showing the Empire's most secure information, military strategies, classified missions. All of it at her fingertips. But it was the figure standing at the far end of the room that caught her attention. Subject Alpha. Tall, imposing, and draped in black armor that seemed to blend into the shadows. He turned toward them. His face was concealed by a helmet, but Rayla could feel his eyes, cold, calculating. A perfect weapon of destruction. Alpha took a step forward, and the floor beneath his feet seemed to tremble. He wasn't human, not in the way Rayla understood. He was something more, something born from the Empire's twisted experiments. "You've come to stop me?" Alpha's voice was a low growl, distorted by the helmet's voice modulator. But there was no mistaking the menace in it. Rayla didn't flinch. She had faced worse. She had faced them, the invaders, the Zephyr, and won. But this was different. Alpha was a weapon of a different caliber. "We're here to end this," Rayla said, her voice steady. "You were never meant to exist." Alpha chuckled, a sound that reverberated off the walls, chilling Rayla to the core. "You think you can stop me? The Empire's hand is long, General. You're nothing more than a shadow in their eyes." Rayla's grip tightened on the detonator, but she didn't press it yet. She knew she needed to keep him distracted, to buy Yarrick enough time to get the systems under control. Jarrek's fingers flew across his console, eyes locked on the terminals. "Rayla, I've got access to their command grid. If we can get to the core, I can upload the files and take down the Empire's entire system. But we need to hold him off long enough." Rayla nodded. "I'll keep him busy. Just get it done." Without another word, Rayla launched herself forward, her body moving on instinct. Alpha was fast, too fast. He blocked her first strike with a swift motion, his gauntlet catching her fist. The force of his grip was like steel, sending a shock of pain up her arm. But she didn't stop. Rayla twisted, using his own strength against him. She kicked out, aiming for his chest, but he blocked it again, faster than she could react. Alpha's sheer power was unlike anything she had ever encountered. Every movement was calculated, precise, designed to incapacitate. "You're strong," she said, through gritted teeth. "But even you can't stop what's coming." The words seemed to rattle him, just for a moment. His helmeted head tilted, as if processing her words. That hesitation was all Rayla needed. She spun on her heel, her elbow slamming into the side of his helmet. It was a glancing blow, but enough to send Alpha back a step. Jarrek's voice cut through the tension. "Rayla, I've uploaded the data. The Empire's command network is crumbling." Alpha's head snapped toward Yarrick, his movements instantaneous. "No," he growled. "You'll pay for that." Rayla launched herself at Alpha once more, this time with a focused, feral intensity. She dodged his strikes, relying on her agility rather than strength to keep her one step ahead. She was fast, unpredictable, something he couldn't calculate. In a final desperate move, Rayla drove her fist into Alpha's exposed side, targeting the weak point in his armor. There was a sickening crack as the blow landed, and Alpha faltered. He turned to face her fully, his movements slowing. The machine was breaking down. Rayla didn't hesitate. She pressed the detonator. The entire facility shuddered, the walls reverberating with the force of the explosion. Alpha let out a final, guttural roar, and then silence. His massive frame crumpled, collapsing to the ground in a heap. Jarrek's voice came through the comms, his tone sharp but relieved. "It's done. The Empire's network is gone." Rayla looked down at the wreckage of the Empire's ultimate weapon. The battle wasn't over, far from it. But with Subject Alpha destroyed, the Empire's hold on the galaxy had been dealt a significant blow. Rayla turned toward Yarrick. "Let's finish this." The truth had been revealed. The Empire's reign was crumbling, and Rayla Kairos, once a tool of the Empire, had just become the instrument of its destruction.